Welcome. My name is Gerald Newman. I'm the director of the Human Rights Program here at Harvard Law School. And I am very excited today to be able to present to you our guest, Professor Julissa Mantilla Falcón, who is a professor at the Pontifical Universidad Católica del Peru, and who has a long distinguished career in human rights advocacy, service on the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, of which she also has served as president. And she is here today to talk to us about anti-gender politics in Latin America, which I'm afraid we may want to view as part of a somewhat larger topic, anti-gender politics in the Americas. The moderator who will be running the event is our esteemed colleague, Professor Alicia Yemen, who is, among many other things, director of the Center for Human Rights, for Global Health Policy and Rights at the Pedro Flom Center, and a renowned expert on sexual and reproductive rights and the right to health, and a long-time cherished collaborator of the Human Rights Program. So without more, I will hand the word first to Professor Yemen.
Thank you very much, Jerry. So I want to actually pick up where Professor Newman left off, and obviously in light of the electoral results in the United States, positions on gender are very much at the forefront of many of our minds in the United States, but this is, as Professor Newman suggested, not just a US or even a regional phenomenon, but a global phenomenon. I want to read a quote from Gail Rubin, who actually wrote this quite a long time ago, but I think it's apt for today. Disputes over sexual behavior often become the vehicles for displacing social anxieties and discharging their attendant emotional intensity. Consequently, sexuality should be treated with special respect in times of great social stress, which we no doubt are in today. Sex is always political, but there are also historical periods in which sexuality is more sharply contested and more overtly politicized. In such periods, the domain of erotic life is, in effect, renegotiated. Since at least the mid-1990s, with the transsexual conferences of Cairo and Beijing, there has been a backlash against what is often termed gender ideology. In some ways, that's an invented phantasm. And I think we are seeing now in a tide of rising conservative populism a real apex of this movement and of using gender as kind of, and gender ideology, anti-gender ideology as a mobilizing force in political movements around the world. And Latin America may be sort of, although it is not limited to Latin America, it may be kind of a ground zero for seeing how this has played out. So with that, I will turn it over to Julissa, and we're super excited to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Newman, Professor Abadir, and of course, Alicia, that we met several years ago in Peru and then re-met in Mexico. I'm very glad to be here and to share some ideas about this, because we are facing a very difficult moment in Latin America, not only Latin America, and I think that everything that we took for granted, I mean democracy, human rights, judicial independence, non-discrimination, is now at risk. And additionally, I think that in general people believe that having democracy is having elections, and it's only a part of what is real democracy in general. I think that democracy deals with formal and real equality and with inclusion and human rights of people. But if we talk about inclusion and human rights, it means that we are breaking these traditional and hegemonic models which are based on inequality on power. And in this case, inequality, where women are not at the same level, even though we have elections and women have the possibility of participating in these elections, you can have this formal equality, but not real. I'm thinking about now, if I may, about the case of Mexico. They are going to have popular elections for judges, and it's a lot of discussion about independence and impartiality. But some colleagues of mine was telling me about what's happening now with women that want to become judges. You know that people don't vote in majority for women to be governors or president. Can you imagine that they are going to vote for them for being judges? So women have the opportunity to be a judge in Mexico or in Bolivia, for instance, if they go to the law school. Now with these popular elections of judges, women are not having the same possibility as the other people. So I think that is something that deal with lack of equality. And you know, if we want to keep, if we keep talking, and I think it's necessary to keep talking about reproductive autonomy of women, what means that we are able to decide when to become a mother or not, or when we say feminists that unpaid work is work, but people see that as our obligation as women. When we start talking about that, we attack the traditional order, and people don't like that. So this anti-gender movement or anti-feminist movement, how they stop or trying to stop our struggle for equality? I think, first of all, demonizing that struggle. So when we talk about reproductive autonomy, they say that we are rejecting life or attacking life. When we say that it's important the recognition of unpaid labor, is attacking as we are destroying traditional and natural form of family when women take care of everything inside the house. Comprehensive sexual education is attacked in Latin America as promiscuity. So I think that there is an absolute fear of women's freedom, of gender freedom, and the problem that I see as former commissioner is how lack of democracy in some countries are using our rights, to cover this lack of human rights. For example, one example is Guatemala. In 2002, the Inter-American Commission decided to include Guatemala in the Chapter 4B of the final report of the Commission. The Chapter 4B is for countries that have the gross situation of human rights violations. Traditionally, it was Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. But in 2002, the Commission decided to put Guatemala there because of the very complicated situation of lack of judicial independence. So what the former President Yamatei did, he traveled to the Permanent Council and the OAS, I was the president at the time, and he started saying that the Commission put Guatemala in that chapter because we have a pro-abortion agenda, and Guatemala is the capital of life in Central America. So he didn't discuss all the situation with the lack of independence and a lot of attacks against the judiciary, but they said that the Commission has a pro-abortion, and this was the only reason for putting them. The second example is Argentina. In 2023, Argentina asked the Inter-American Court for an advisory opinion about the definition of the right to care, non-discrimination on caring roles, because most of caring roles are assumed by women, and the state obligation. So there was a request in 2023. The court has more than 30 hearings, amicus, documents, trying to build this new advisory opinion, 31 that is going to be published this year, I think, or maybe next one, about right to care. What happened this year with the new president, Javier Milei? The president, Javier Milei, the government, tried to withdraw the request. They say that it was not important for that anymore to talk about the right to care. But the court decided to dismiss this request of the government, saying that it's not only a problem of Argentina, but the whole region has a legitimate interest about talking about the right to care. So I think that it's very complicated, for instance, when we are trying to break this traditional order, but also and I try to focus as a former commissioner in the Inter-American system. Why? Because these states with this government are nominating and electing commissioners and judges at the Inter-American system. At the Inter-American system, in the commission, there are at least 3 commissioners opposing abortion and the right to gender identity. And when you found these people opposing only to these two issues, we have a problem, we have a problem with that. Actually, one of the arguments is that gender identity is not explicitly included in the American Convention as a factor of discrimination. Yeah, but if you read the American Convention, it doesn't include age or other kind of discrimination, not all the kinds of discrimination. For instance, the right to gender identity was in the advisor opinion 24th of the Inter-American Court as a source of discrimination, It was not in the American Convention, gender identity, but the court talked about that in the advisory opinion. So some people say that since it's not in the convention, it's not compulsory or mandatory. But if you read the convention doesn't include right to truth or the right to defend human rights. They are not in the convention, but the court talk about that, so people accept that. So the question is, why you complain about right to gender identity when you don't complain about the other rights that are not explicitly in the convention? And the second thing is about the court. The court is about to rule on Beatriz versus El Salvador case. This is a case of a woman, she has lupus, and she was pregnant with an anencephalic fetus. So she asked for the interruption of the pregnancy. In El Salvador, you have a complete ban abortion. So you don't have any possibility of having abortion. Even though you have a natural abortion, you go to jail. So this case went to the court. I was the commissioner in charge of that case, and we asked the court to explain and to say that how having a complete ban on abortion is not protecting life, because poor women are going to have abortion anyway, and they are the only ones that are going to die, because even you have a natural abortion, you go to jail. I have these papers that Kai is going to help me, please. Thank you. As I say, the case of Beatriz is about to be released, the sentence maybe this year or the next one. Look at what appeared in front of the court. This panel was in the street in Costa Rica in front of the court, trying to pressing the judges on that. It never happened before. It never happened before. And I remember when I was in Costa Rica with this case, people outside was yelling at us, attacking the commissioners, attacking the judges. And if I can share that with you, when the hearing finished, we couldn't go out for the main door because it was full of people attacking us. So we tried to go out to the back door. But you know what happened there? When we were in the back door and we went, all the commissioners going out, there was a lot of women clapping at us and yelling. I'm very happy and crying about what we did. And they say, thank you very much, because you are helping us with our right to decide. That's why we say, okay, we're going to the main door. So what to do now? This is the main question now, what to do? I don't have the strategy, the complete strategy, but I have some ideas that I think that I can share and we can talk about it. First of all, I think it's our duty not take it for granted the link between democracy and human rights, and to be concerned about what's going on. Second, I think that the academy in general should look more closely at what's happening at the country level. We have these discussions, and it's important to have the academic discussion. As a teacher, I always say so. But we have to look at what's going on in the real life. The other thing is that we have to protect the national and international human rights systems, because the pressure over these people is a lot, They are holding on, but they need the support of the academy, of everybody. And finally, at this time, I believe that it's important to maintain hope as a form of resistance. So that's where I start. Thank you.
So I want to start out with a bit of a challenge. And both of us have been in this struggle for a very long time and have shared ups and downs. But there is an argument that the feminist movement here and in many countries in Latin America is somewhat elitist, has this kind of transnational idea of what is, what women's rights are and gender rights are. And the reaction to that found fertile ground, the anti-wokeism in the United States, the anti-sort of cultural Marxism arguments in Colombia, for example, and that the feminist movements have actually relied too much on establishing norms and standards in supranational fora, and have not paid sufficient attention to building grassroots movements. I mean, in Peru, you have influence in the Congress, you have influence in grassroots movements through churches, you have influence through government, famous Opus Dei or Sotalicia ministers of health. So what would you say to that in terms of moving forward?
Yeah, actually, it's very hard. I mean, when you have all these need for discussions, what's going on, what's happening, and you have all this information that is important to have, but on the other hand, you don't have food, or you don't have light, or you don't have electricity and that. So that's why I always talk about the baño realidad, like it's the shower of reality. Because let me put an example. It was about the pandemic, you know, when we have to be at home all the time. So we were concerned about our health, but nobody think about women living and forced to be living with the rapists or the teenagers with the rapists, and what happened with this pregnancy after that. So my recommendation, my suggestion is to put a gender perspective and the differential approach wherever. I think that feminist movement is doing a lot, but maybe not. A perspective is to see what is feminist in general and what is feminist in each space. For instance, when I was in Colombia several years ago, we have some cases. I was talking with some women's organizations of victims, and I always work about sexual violence or difficulties of sexual violence. And my experience, for instance, of the cases that I investigate in Peru is that when women are pregnant after the rape, they never tell the husband. No, in the conflict, no, you know, they lie or they say no, okay, we're going to have a baby, whatever. But when I was there with Afro-Colombian women, they say, we cannot lie. We cannot say nothing happened, because if they were raped by a white man, everybody's going to realize that this baby was not the husband's one. So how to see that different and particularities of all the human rights violation and the feminist situation is important. At that event, we have some feminists from the city and some organization of indigenous. And we feminists talk about the individual right and everything, but the other women from the indigenous say, individual is for you. We are in a collectivity. So that's why I think about the shower of reality. It's important to have all this discussion, but we never ever has to lose this foot in reality. And one last example is from Honduras, because I was in Honduras giving a workshop to policemen. And one of these police told me, because I was talking about gender and everything, and he said, we have a problem. When we, you know, have a trans woman, she didn't want a man to approach to her. She wants a female police. But the women, the police women, they didn't want to touch a transgender woman. So the police asked me, what should I do? Should I force the female police to go, or should I force him, or what should I do? And I asked this question in an academic debate, and some colleagues say, no, but it's important to, that's why it's important to have more transgender people in the police forces. Yes, I agree with that. But this discussion could be next year. What should I say to this guy now? You know, and that's why I think this link between what we debate, what we read, and what's going on in reality is so important, because these police need an answer now and need and wanted to deal with that, you know, and that's why I think that but not only feminists, all what we debate and what we talk should be, you know, with this link with reality all the time.
So actually, continuing on that line, I want to come back to Argentina because you mentioned Javier Milei.
Yes.
So Argentina, for those of you who don't know, legalized abortion in the first trimester by legislation that's different from what happened in Mexico and Colombia, for example. There's a very, very broad-based public debate about abortion and reproductive justice in Argentina prior to its legalization in 2020. It's widely referred to social decriminalization because it reduced stigma and et cetera. And Milei came into power, as you said, in 2023, and is very despite being an anarcho-capitalist and completely libertarian on every other issue,
yes.
He is extremely anti-gender and wants to roll back reproductive rights. And so, you know, but a bill to rescind that legislation got nowhere in out of committee. It didn't even get out of committee. But what he has done is to starve the health system of resources, right? So they're out of supplies, they're out of misoprostol, they're out of contraception. He has basically eliminated a very, very successful program on adolescent pregnancy called Plan Niña, but by starving it of resources and changing the political economy. And that Argentina is a very extreme example of that, but I think we see that a lot in the region where we make normative gains, but the actual infrastructure of delivery on rights does not exist. As you said, when you have to eat, how can you think about these other issues? So how can we fight those battles?
Yeah, actually, Argentinian case and the green, how do you say, pañuelo verde, green handkerchief?
Green wave,
Yes, the green wave. It was a hope for Latin America, for women, you know, and to have this strong fight for that. And now, when the election and the economical crisis in Argentina was awful, you know, this was like a big challenge for people in general who say, I'm very supportive, I'm ally of the feminists, but I'm going to vote for Milei because of the economical crisis. So this is an questions, una pregunta propia, self-questions about, okay, how ally I was, how feminist I was if I had to make this decision. So, and this it's important to be honest with ourselves, you know. I have this right, I like feminism, I have freedom, autonomy, whatever, but I have to choose for that. You know, this is the first thing that I think that is important, to have this evaluation of our values and our decisions first. Second, I think that it's what happened in Argentina, in Peru as well, is people are very despair, like lack of hope, like very tired of keep fighting all the time. When you see the picture of the protests in Argentina, you see all women, 70, 80, fighting, and say, I cannot believe that they're still fighting for the same thing, you know, like I was fighting 20 years ago. What I think now is important is to be very open about that. One tool is the Inter-American system, and I think that the Beatriz case, Manuela's versus El Salvador case, but all the press release of the American Convention about freedom of autonomy, it's important. And I think that we start sharing this comparative development. One is the international system, Inter-American system, but United Nations system as well. You know, because Inter-American is very attacked. I don't say that UN not, but UN, for instance, we were talking before that the CEDAW committee passed these judgments about forced sterilization cases in Peru, you know. So we have to be very aware of the international standards, but also the comparative advances. Colombia, for instance, they recognize reproductive violence during the armed conflict. That is something that no tribunal ever did before. So I think that we have to be very informed about that, and we have to find institutions, you know, that support us. Some years ago, in the case of Peru, I will tell, and you know that, about the Ombudsman Office. It was a very strong institution. Not anymore. Not anymore in Peru. Not anymore. But there might be another institution. In the case of Peru, for instance, they passed a law of impunity against crimes against humanity. The Congress passed that recently. But who is resisting? The judicial power, the prosecutor office. So we have to be aware of the international advancement, but also to keep and support our institution. And the other thing that is very, very, we have to have alliance between us. Maybe for me, it's easier to talk about what's going on in Argentina. Maybe for Argentina, it's easier to talk what's happening in Peru, because, and I have to be very honest, sometimes you are afraid of the consequences, you know. That thing, I think that this is important. And the other thing, where we are here in the United States, what happened recently with the election as well. So tough times. It's like a cycle. But as I say, we have the obligation to have hope. Hope as an obligation, you know, there is no other way.
Hope and action as
Exactly.
opposed to nihilism.
Yes.
So I have one last question, which, you know, and all of these questions I think are challenge that idea of hanging on to hope. But, you know, Trump just was elected and feels as though he has a broad mandate. And one of the many consequences of that is that the Geneva Consensus Declaration is going to be revived and probably turbocharged now. So, and that is sort of the opposite, an alliance of reactionary forces around the world that will have an influence on normative standards in many different spaces. So how, as progressives, how do we come together to challenge that, present resistance?
I hope that I have the answer, but at least we can think about that. Let me tell you some stories about, because as I've been working for a long time as an academic and also as a human rights advocate with victims in Peru, in Colombia. And let me talk about the case of forced sterilization, no? When we met. They happened in the 90s in Peru, these forced sterilizations. I had several women. They were waiting for 20 years. So when we met, we were in the 90s. I was working in the Ombudsman office about that cases, and we filed the cases that. When I was in the commission, I saw one of the, well, I couldn't see that because I was Peruvian, but I know that there was a friendly settlement of one case and another case that passed to the Inter-American Court. So I told this story in Professor Newman class in September 17, October, one colleague called me and said, could you give a talk, you know, a speech to the victims of forced sterilization, please, you know? I said, of course. So I went to Cayetano to give and really, I was going to give a talk about human rights and that, but suddenly I recognized these women. The same women that we met in the 90s, the same women. I was sitting with some of them, I say, oh my God, 30 years fighting for justice. Some of them have cancer because of the sterilization. Some of them tell that their husband leave because they want to have more children and they couldn't have children. And they were there in the public, listening to me, raising the hands, saying to me, you know, you can help us. And I was shocked, Alicia. After that, I called my colleague and I say, okay, I know that you have this case in CEDAW committee. Do you need an amicus? What can I do? I don't know, I can call. But October 30th, the the CEDAW passed this resolution saying that there was a human rights violation. The state of Peru said that it was a program for everybody, not only for women, but the CEDAW analyzed that most of them were victims were women, poor women, illiterate women, indigenous women. And I saw Maria Elena Carvajal, one of the authors of the petition, that I was in the conference. So I don't have the answer for how to resist, but I really think if these women are 30 years fighting and resisting, we should do the same.
Gracias. On that note, can we open it up to questions?
Thank you very much for your talk. It was very informative. I wanted to understand, do you think some of these culture wars have been exported from like countries like the US? And was it by, are there any organizations which you think are responsible for this? Any transnational organizations? Because when I see this a lot in certain African countries, a lot of the language is similar to what you see in the US, and there are certain organizations which actively go to Africa, like in Uganda,
Yes.
when they passed the anti-homosexuality law, you could see some of the American groups going and lobbying there. So I was curious to know if there are certain organizations which you're aware of, which are responsible for, increasing that type of anti-gender politics in Latin America.
I think that there's a general movement, and actually some Congress people were in Spain and they had meeting with Vox, that is the conservative party in Spain, about these issues as well. Some churches, not well, Catholic churches, but also evangelic churches, they have actually some former candidate Keiko Fujimori signed an agreement with the evangelic church before the election, about these issues. So I think that there's a conversation on that. And we have the cases of the Sodalicio, that it was this part of the church were responsible of raping children for a long time. But the Sodalicio as well was one of the part of the church that were supporting, this cultural battle, as they say. So actually, I can tell my own story. When I was a candidate of the American Commission, there was 2 or 3 people who even went to the General Assembly and started attacking me, saying that I was the most important representative of the abortion fight in Peru. So I said, what? and I can make a joke now. I call my feminist friends and say, come on. You were fighting 20 years and I'm the most important abortion. I don't even have an article on that. And then they start creating the hashtag, no Julissa killing babies. And I was going to the bathroom and they came, asked me, and they start taping me and put videos, and I was like shocked. And after that, I realized some of the people belong to the Sodalicio part of it. So it's like a general movement on that. And they have a lot of money on that as well.
Hello, thanks first of all for opening these spaces in the university. And I think it's not anymore about abortion, it's not anymore about life, it's about us as women. This crazy guy saying like, your body, my decision by these days in the news was something heartbreaking for us. And my question is, well, yeah, what is happening, I'm from Colombia anyway, and what is happening in the United States is devastating. But in Colombia, we have Gustavo Petro as president that is a progressist and that came with some promises for the feminist agenda, and he's not into this agenda anymore. So I really want to have faith, I really want to have hope, but I think we don't have guarantees, not even with this guy Trump, but also not even with progressist government. Do you have any advice on how to come with that? And I mean, in Colombia, they are coming with different governors and different people in the public agenda that have been violating women, and they are not doing nothing about it.
Thanks for that. I used to live in Colombia like 4 or 5 years, 7 years ago, and you're totally right about what you mentioned, because here we are talking about the ultra right wing, but it's the left as well. And I remember during the campaign, Gustavo Petro put Francia Marquez as the vice president, that is an Afro. exactly. She's an Afro-Colombian, and the people endorsed the vote for her to him. And everybody was expecting an agenda about feminists and about Afro-Colombian people, but nothing happened. And even though there was some people of the government that is being accused of rape and sexual harassment, actually there was this guy who was about to be became an ambassador, Victor. Yeah, Victor something, and he was about to be an ambassador by Petro, but feminists start complaining, and he has to resign. So what I think about Colombia, that I think it is important, is this strong movement, women's movement, for years, because Colombia has a conflict for a long time, and I still have some part of that. But the organizations were fighting for peace, but also for human rights of women. So Iniciativa de Mujeres por la Paz, CISMA, Humana, there are a lot of organizations there, and what they have is a lot of strong women also in the Congress. So I think that this is a possibility. And one thing that I like about that, it was not only women. You have the Justicia, Rodrigo Primi, Jesse Reyes, people, men as well, that they support the human rights of women in general. So with Colombia, even though it's difficult, I think the movement is very strong there. And with these cases before the Inter-American Court, like Cajar case, where the court say that the right to defend human rights is a right itself, that is something new, an autonomous right, it's important. With Ginée Bedoya case, Ginée Bedoya was a journalist who was raped in jail when she was doing an interview, and now she's a leader on that. And a part of the reparation of the Ginée Bedoya case is to build a center for human rights of women and victims of sexual violence, So there was these strong leaders that give hope on that.
Well, thank you so much for that quote on maintaining the hope. I think like throughout the last weeks and in general, I'm from Peru, so we are living a lot of backward policies and that. So my question was more on the inter-American system you mentioned, because I think when the situation internally in the country is very weak, what we have is these international institutions, but in a lot of our countries, there's also this negative opinion about them.
Yes.
Because of some decisions that might have happened in the past regarding, especially, I think, terrorism cases, things like that. So what's your view on that to kind of maybe help us understand more? And I don't know if there's anything that there should be any change in how binding are the decisions, because now it's like, we recommend, for example, Peru to go back in that policy, but in the end, Peru is like, they don't say nothing.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for your question, and I have to say that I'm very happy to meet Peruvians here. Give me hope. Anyway, this is very good, and one thing that is important is that people really know how the inter-American system works. Because many people don't know about that, and for instance, people say, I'm going to the court. No, you have first to go to the commission, and only the commission take the cases to the court, for instance. And for instance, there is this idea in Peru that the court rule and to pay reparation, money, compensation to the terrorism. And they talk about the case, Chavín de Guantar case. It was a Cruz Sanchez case. It was when, the terrorist movement, Tupac Amaru, they have hostage in the Japan embassy, and then they were released, but they killed some of the terrorists. So people say that this case, the Cruz Sanchez case, the court condemned the military and paid reparation for the terrorists. And they repeat like that. I challenge people to find that in the sentence. First of all, the sentence says, we are not a criminal tribunal, so we are not judging the Chavín de Guantar people first. And second, they say, we are not giving economical reparation because we, the court, think that publishing the sentence is enough reparation. So, but there are these myths that people repeat and repeat and repeat. So first of all, I think it's important to know the whole thing. And the other myth is that the court only takes cases of terrorists and non-militaries. I always quote the Quispealaya case against Peru. This guy, this man, Quispealaya, he was a soldier. And when he was practicing, you know, he was beat by the lieutenant, the superior, and he lost his eye. So this case went in front of the commission and then the court, and the court said that the state has a special obligation for soldiers because they are under the control of the state. And second, they say there was a violation of the right of integrity. And the other thing that in the case of Quispealaya, they want to put the case, the state, in the criminal forum. You know? And the court say, no, this is not a function, this is a crime, should be to the civil judges. So this was a case when it was a soldier, it was not a terrorist at all. And the other thing that is more concerning, I totally understand when people say, okay, the commission says so, and the court says so. For instance, the court say that Fujimori couldn't be released, and the state say, okay, it doesn't matter, I'm going to release him, whatever. No? And this law against, this law of impunity, the court say to the state, don't pass this law, and the state pays the law. So it's very disappointing that. And as a commissioner, I sometimes feel, okay, I had this feeling before being a commissioner sometimes, but as a commissioner, I think that it would be worse if we didn't have the commission and the court. Even though the commission is not a police, you cannot force the state, it would be worse. And the other thing is that Nicaragua, for instance, that is not part of the system anymore, but the victims of Nicaragua call to the commission every single day. And inside the commission, there was the MECENI, that is a special mechanism inside the commission for treating Nicaragua cases. So Nicaragua victims call the commission every single day. The commission complete the documentation, send us the court for special protection. Even though Nicaragua say, I'm not going to go for that, people are there. Even Cuba, people from Cuba ask requests for hearings, and the commission has hearings on Cuba. So even though sometimes you feel it's disappointed, it will be worse. And especially in the case of Peru and the massacres of last year with the protests, the commission released a report saying that all of this is not a case in front of the court, but if one of the victims of that massacres want to go to the court, probably could use this report as a part of the evidence.
Thank you so much, Julissa, for this inspiring talk. I'm very curious about your role, about your struggles in everyday life with gender politics. And you are the first woman president of the Inter-American Commission. You're also a professor. How do you navigate your teaching as well as interactions at the international levels? What are the opportunities and struggles? Thank you.
A lot. I can tell you for ages. But one example is when I arrived to the commission, we were two new commissioners, Commissioner Estuardo Ralón from Guatemala and myself. And when we have meetings with everybody, ambassadors, or even the lawyer of the commission, they address to the Commissioner Ralón, Commissioner Estuardo Ralón, and they address to me, hey, Julissa, how are you? All the time. Even though when I was the president of the commission, we were in Germany in one event with the president of the court. All the people addressed to him as president of the court, and Julissa, what do you think? You know, this was one struggle, because when you sometimes feel, okay, should I complain? Maybe I overreacting. So if you complain and you feel that you are overreacting, you're going to feel very bad. But if you don't complain and people start talking, you are going to feel very bad. So I arrived to one conclusion. The best reaction is the reaction that you feel that you have to have. So I start highlighting the situation, and I say to everybody, to the lawyers, do you realize that you, no, yeah. And after commissioner, president, commissioner, and it's not because I wanted to be, no, it's because they treat women always in a different way. sometimes, well, some of you know Angela. Angela was my student. So some of you know me, Melissa know me. When I talk like that. I'm very straight and talk and talk and talk. And sometimes when I finish meetings in the commission, even commissioners, men start yelling or something, some approach to me, maybe you can use a soft tone of your voice. Maybe I say, why? No, because she feel bad or he feel bad. And I say, the day that you talk to one male commissioner and you ask the same, then I will think if I want to do that. But there is no way that they always ask women to have a low voice and men can yell whatever. So these kind of daily things. Another thing that I as a challenge in the commission, because I was a rapporteur of different topics, for instance, I was rapporteur of migrants, so I put a gender perspective on that. Then I was rapporteur for older people, so I start focusing on women, older women. But what challenge was to put this gender perspective inside the commission. It was not only to have this rapporteur of women, I was the rapporteur of women. So I called, for instance, the dean of petition and cases, all the lawyers, and we start talking about gender, and human rights of women. And also with the precautionary measures, please focus on women in order to know what's going on. So there was like a mixing thing about the daily struggles as a feminist, a human rights lawyer, but also being a woman. And if I can share something else, some years ago, I was in Mexico in one seminar with some other colleagues, feminists and human rights organizations. At some point after dinner, I don't know why, someone started talking about these people do that and that. And one very well-known human rights feminist lawyer told me that when she was entering to the court to litigate, she met one of the ambassadors of the country, no? And the ambassador, hello, how are you? How are you? You're very fat now. And she was like, what? And this is something important because you have to struggle to be very well prepared, very assertive, very professional, and still you have to deal with if you are fat or not fat or whatever. So these kind of things, that's why feminism is used for, because you can put that, it's not on me, it's in them. It's not only men, because I always say the fight is not against men, it's against machismo, it's against patriarchy. But the feminists help you to put the distance between them and myself. And you have another thing that I can share, is that many times when we're very young, when we just starting, we couldn't say anything. Maybe it's the professor, maybe it's the boss, maybe someone very important, and you cannot talk at that time. But now I can talk, for instance. So it is important to raise your voice. When you cannot, maybe you cannot raise your voice for yourself because it's very hard for one to talk, but maybe you can raise your voice for your colleague or your friends, on the people on the street. It is important to raise your voice, especially there are so many opportunities that you cannot raise your voice. So when you have this opportunity, you have to take it.
A couple of times today, we talked about religion and the law, and in a lot of human rights fields, especially feminist gender issues, I get the sense that lawyers and the law seem to be where the progressive movement is, and in that normative system versus the normative system that has more grassroots presence, which is the religious normative system. And I wonder if it's true in South America that this is the structure as well. Well, you have progress in legal norms, but not in the religious normative systems that have a better grassroots reach. And if there's contest of that normative system.
Yeah, but the thing is, in Latin America, especially in Peru, well, I can talk to Peru, is that the legal is not that influenced by religious, like a normative thing. But for instance, now the Congress, in the Congress of Peru, there are a lot of people, especially the Congresswoman that is in charge of the Commission of Women, that she's putting this kind of religion all the time. Actually, I don't have any problem with religion, we can have the right to have our belief, but you're a Congress there, Congressman or Congresswoman, not to put your religion, your belief in front of everybody. This woman says something like, I was not sure about this law because she wanted to pass something about sexual education or something, and she said, but the Holy Spirit told me to do that. This is the reason to pass this law. for instance, no, on they have another project that are very concerned about have adoption in pregnant. So it means that when you are pregnant by rape, you have, while you are pregnant, you can, deal with the adoption, But I don't think that it's something institutional like that. But when you allow that to happen, then we have a problem, and it's a whole, and this deals with the whole control of the judiciary and the whole control of everybody. For instance, before this government, we have gender orientation, gender policy, gender identity, even in laws, in administrative things, for instance, there was a ruling of the Constitutional Court in Peru that judicial operations should be, you should study with a gender perspective. They start stopping that, because, but I don't think that it's a charge dealing with that, but people in that situation.
My question was, why does the Holy Spirit always? Why not on the left?
I don't know.
Shouldn't the fight be taken?
Next time I talk to the Holy Spirit, I will ask.
I think that's a valid point, Abadir. I mean, I think that much of the struggle in Latin America has been for a lay state, Estado laico, and there is this sort of, I think the counter movement has portrayed, the narrative is that Estado laico and feminism is somehow amoral and lacking traditional family values, right? And that has certainly been mobilized very successfully.
Yes.
And I think the same could be said of the United States, right?
Okay, hi, I'm also from Peru. We always discuss this, and we always, like with Kathy, we were studying together on how to try to combat these anti-gender movements in Peru, con mis hijos no te metas, etc. And I know narrative is a very important part in that, and that's something that we don't really talk about much when discussing policy. We talk about the normative part, we talk about other things, technically correctness, etc. So I was wondering, because right now having hope is difficult.
Yes.
Is there a way to combat this narrative from these groups that it's not only Peru, it's around Latin America, without having a group that is equal to them? So for example, usually it's the far right that has these movements that create these narratives, and then the progressive side that has nothing and just try to do it from an institutional part or from independent fights. So is there a way to combat this independently, or is there a necessity for a group of the same
level?
Yeah, to do so. And that, and how to do this without having no presence in institutions, because usually when you have a sort of private organization doing this, and institutions can come and say, no, this is not, human rights, etc., equality. But right now in our country, everything is the same.
Yes.
So I don't know if you have any ideas on how to combat that.
I can talk about my experience from the legal part of view. Like a legal perspective. For instance, in the academy, in my university, I have all the support to teach my class. I will never ever have any problem talking about everything that I'm talking now. So the academic is one thing. For me, the other important thing is to work with the prosecutors and the judiciary. I also teach prosecutors, and I explain to them, because what is more difficult about gender, because if we are lawyers and we know about that, we say, no, discrimination, that. But when you were raised thinking that being an homosexual is a sin, and it's very bad, there's no law that is going to convince of that. That's why you start thinking of, for me, my approach is about the non-discrimination. Let me tell you a story. When I was in the Truth Commission, I worked in the Truth Commission, I traveled around the country to give workshops with the lawyers of the commission about gender. So when I went to the countryside that is more conservative, I always feel like in Ayacucho, Huancayo, wherever, I always feel like, come on, this woman is coming from Lima, from the main city, talking to me, very resistance from men. And I feel that. So I start talking about racial discrimination. And I told them, have you ever been in Lima? How do you feel? What do you like? How they treat you? And one guy told me, I will never forget, because he said that he was crossing the street and a car almost killed him. And he made a mistake, so the driver looked at him and yelled, "Serrano de mierda," what means, how do you say in English?
Like a
yes.
hick, yeah, it's
It's
very
very bad,
disparaging.
very bad.
Yeah.
And he says something, and it's interracial insult. And this guy told me, say, it hurt me so much that you start crying. It was a guy. So I say, well, do you remember this pain? Yes, it was an awful pain. Okay, this is the pain that discrimination gives you all the time. Sometimes because you are not from the main city, sometimes because you are Afro-Peruvian, sometimes because you're a woman, sometimes you have a disability. But we all have in mind is that it's painful. So please tell me, if you know how this painful is, why you want these women to have the same pain? So when you have this connection with these people, when you look for something in common, it's easier to talk. And the other thing, when we talk about gender, it's important to talk about masculinity. I always ask the guys in my class, okay, please tell me, when you were a child, they told you men don't cry? Yes, yes. Always say yes. Did you ever cry? Yes, of course. So you are not men? I say, no. So what's happened? So if you're repeating to a little boy, men don't cry, you're sending a message. So it's important when you talk about gender to talk about this masculinity. It's very hard, to have the standards. So answering your question, I think that it's important to have this space to debate, to talk about that, to talk to the people in general. I'm going to start in January one course in Peru, as in the Centro Cultural. It's an open course. It's not for law, it's for everybody. So last year we have the experience. I have a housewife, I have an artist, I have a lawyer, I have a police, a doctor. And we talk about these issues in a very open way, of being a man, of being a woman, of being from the countryside, of being from the main city. And I think I cannot say, I don't have the answer to how to change everything. I know how to do my job, and I'm going to keep that, and this is a way to have hope. So maybe what you are doing and you are studying, you have the possibility as well to make that change.
Can I add just a little bit? Things are looking pretty bleak at the moment. I agree with that. But the advantage of growing old and doing this for many, many years is being able to look back and see when times were bleak and it was overcome. And I think, for example, I grew up between Argentina and the United States, and during the military dictatorship, the civic military dictatorship, things could not have been bleaker. But the mothers and the abuelas of the Plaza de Mayo were marched around the plaza because they were basically the only people who were allowed to protest in public, and they were protesting, going back to what Julissa said at the beginning, for democracy as well as to recover their children and grandchildren. After the return of democracy in Argentina, that mantra came to be taken on in many cases by feminists who said you cannot have a real democracy if you have two criminal justice systems, one for public offenses and a totally different impunity system within the household for interpersonal violence. And then later, the green wave of reproductive justice. You can't have a real democracy if the health system does not attend to the needs of half of the population. And that was a massive intergenerational movement that moved, the entire society in Argentina. And you think similarly of women's movements in Iran and elsewhere, which, I think that we really have a very strong narrative about what it means to live in a meaningful democracy, a democratic political economy based on notions of moral and political equality and all our diversity. I just think we need to strategize a little bit more to pull it together.
Yes, yes, indeed.
And we still,
Yes.
Well, I don't know if this is politically correct, but we are running a new caucus in the Harvard Kennedy School of Women in Power, and we hadn't been able to get the data of the university of women accepted here at Harvard. And they are not allowing us to know, I mean, the percentage. We know the percentage of our mid-career masters, and it's 35% of women. But in this fight that we're having, like for letting more women to have access to the university, we don't have the data, and they are not even allowing us. We don't need names. We don't need like a whole economical status of the people who enter here, but we need a percentage, and we are not allowed to get this data. How do you feel about that, first? And second, well, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. How can we get this data? Is this legal that they don't let us know how many women are getting into this university?
Actually, I don't know. I should ask about. I don't think that is illegal. I mean, but you have to look at the rule of confidence, whatever. And I think that is important, of course, to have data because you cannot have a statistical percentage on that. But other than politics in Harvard, maybe the Harvard lawyers know.
But the confidence is about names and real data, and I can get it.
Yeah,
Okay,
sure.
it's a percentage.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really know.
I'm just thinking about that you are lawyers and I'm an engineer.
Yeah, but I don't know how the ruling are here. So, lawyer professor maybe.
so with that, please join me in thanking our wonderful speaker.
Thank you.
I also want to thank La Alianza, Harvard Law School advocates, and the Human Rights Program in its entirety, and the Petrie Flom Center for Law, Policy, and Biotechnology and Bioethics for co-sponsoring.
Thank you very much for you. Thank you. It's an honor.